A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
The Queensland State Government appear to have pulled their controversial anti-discrimination bill and are replacing it with the Respect at Work and Other Matters Amendment Bill. Many of the most problematic parts of the ADA have been removed. However, there are still areas of the new bill that are concerning to faith communities. Mike Southland is the Executive Director of Freedom for Faith, activating the church to defend religious freedoms. And he joins us now. Mike, welcome.
Thank you.
Mike, for our listeners that aren't familiar with the bill that appears to about to be replaced in Queensland, can you tell us what the previous anti-discrimination bill was?
It was a large bill that was being put forward by the Queensland government to completely replace and rewrite anti-discrimination legislation in Queensland. So it was a massive undertaking in the first place. It had a lot of problems in it, but the biggest problem was that it dramatically undermined the ability of faith organisations and schools to be able to employ people who and require people to live out their faith and hold an active faith to be an employee. And so we could go through the detail. There's a lot of ways that it undermined the ability of these faith organisations to say, oh, no, you're not actually living the way that our faith says. We think that you should, either we won't employ you or we think it's time for you to find another job. So that really destroyed the ability of a faith organisation to keep being having their faith and living out their faith as a group.
Yeah, so it obviously was very concerning to faith communities and anyone really interested in personal civil liberty in Queensland. So this appears to be good news that they are looking to replace the bill. Is there any indication of why they've made this move?
Well, they've received some very strong, there was a strong public letter to the Premier from a wide number of faith leaders expressing their concerns about the bill. There's also been a campaign of churches and other faith groups writing to their local MP and talking about their concerns. And that's something that we've been helping with, connecting and resourcing churches to connect with their MP. And it sounds like that the government have heard. They've heard the people on the ground, they've heard the leaders of faith communities, and they've said, okay, we have to think about this far more.
Yeah, and this is encouraging, not just for our Queensland listeners, but for our listeners all across Australia, that when people mobilise and actually voice their concerns and apply pressure to their elected members and also through other means and avenues, that sometimes we actually can reverse decisions. It's encouraging for every Christian out there, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And we've seen this result in New South Wales as well, when we coordinate people, particularly writing to, calling and organising a meeting with your local MP. On general, the local politicians don't know what the people in their electorate care about until we take the time of going to their doorstep and telling them. And then when we do, they often listen.
I want to encourage all of our listeners today, if there's anything in your local area, your state government or your federal government that concerns you, do something about it. Pray about it, yes, but we should also act on it. But, Mike, let's look at the proposed new bill. It's got a funny name. It's a very Orwellian name. It's called the Respect at Work and Other Matters Amendment Bill. I mean, that is so cryptic. But it replaces some of the previous issues, but it also potentially creates a few problems too, doesn't it? Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, on the name, there was a report done by the federal government called the Respect at Work Report. And so the theory is that this bill is implementing the recommendations that have come from that report. As you pointed out, though, the slightly concerning part of the name is the "and other matters" bit. The parts of the bill that are implementing the Respect at Work recommendations seem generally quite good. They are trying to stop discrimination and bullying in the workplace in general. However, the way that these bits of the bill have been ripped out of the old proposed anti-discrimination bill very quickly, because the government's trying to put something up. They've only got 2 sitting weeks left to pass any legislation. So they're very hastily trying to at least get something done now that they've realised the anti-discrimination bill's not going to get through. And as a result, it just looks like there are some unintended consequences, things they hadn't thought through properly, but which are going to have some really massive impacts, particularly on faith communities. And we think that the government should be open to hearing our concerns and fixing what are small tweaks which would get rid of some really big possible problems. One of the biggest examples is there's vilification legislation. Vilification is saying you're not supposed to incite hatred because of their various attributes, whether it be race or sex or sexuality or any of these things. That's all fine. But the way it's written is it's introduced a concept called hateful speech. It's not speech that incites hate, but hateful speech. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't actually know a good, clear definition of the word hateful. Some people will just say, oh, that broccoli on my table, that was hateful. It's a word that can refer to something that causes hate or something that I hate, or even if you look in the dictionary, just something that is unpleasant can legitimately be called hateful. So we're really concerned that the legislation allows people to turn around and go, oh, that speech was hateful, and all of a sudden it's illegal and you can be taken to the tribunal. So we think that this legislation could be much clearer, just to have some better words describing what it is that they're trying to stop.
Well, I think that's a good point. Yeah, I'm just thinking, I'm sure if you preached a sermon from the Bible about sin and sinners and hell and heaven, I mean, that could easily be interpreted as hateful, couldn't it, if you were someone who didn't have a faith in Jesus?
Absolutely. Every faith leader that I've talked to of every faith is really concerned about this, because they all teach things, we all teach things that other people turn around and say, that's terrible, you can't say that. Jesus is the only way to God. There is no other way. Now, that's clearly a hateful thing to say to a whole lot of people. So, yeah, the legislation is troubling. It gets a little bit worse when it's the legislation is stopping things that would be considered hateful by a reasonable person. And then it goes on to define a reasonable person is a person who was a member of the category who's been offended. So if I'll switch it round. If a Muslim cleric is standing up and saying there is only one Allah and Christians are wrong and are going to hell, then the question is not, can a reasonable person be offended by this, but would a reasonable Christian consider that to be hateful? And this is pitting minority groups against each other and faith groups against each other, because it's saying, well, it's up to each group to decide what they're going to be reasonably offended by, and then that gets to become illegal. It's a minefield in the way that it's written. And again, we think that a few simple tweaks would clarify it and get rid of some of these bigger problems.
Yeah, well, is there an opportunity for feedback on this proposed legislation that people like yourself and faith communities can actually point this out to the government?
Yes, there is. The government has just opened a submissions process, which you can look up on Google. The invite that we got sent said, send on the invitation to anyone who's interested. So there you go, all your listeners. But there is a submission process and an inquiry process that we're going to be involved in, and we're going to be assisting heads of faith in writing our legal submissions. But we are also going to be calling on your listeners and the people of Queensland to contact their MP, back to what we were saying before, and point out their concerns about this legislation. We're going to have talking points and a guide up on our website by next week, and that's contactyourmp.org.au, and you can go and have your say. Have your say to the submission, sure, to the inquiry, but the really powerful thing to do is to take 5 minutes to write a 2-paragraph email to your local MP.
Excellent. Well, at the end of this segment, we will give everyone your website again to remind them of that. But just quickly, there's also a category in there about harassment on the basis of sex. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, so Respect at Work report does call for banning harassment on the basis of sex. And that, in theory, is saying you cannot harass a woman because she's a woman. You cannot harass a man because he's a man. But this legislation, as it's been written, has got a broader definition of sex, which includes lines like the sex the other person has been, even if they're not that sex at the time of conduct. And so, again, the way that's written starts to ask, would us teaching our beliefs about sexuality and about gender, would they actually be counted as harassment on the basis of sex. And again, we think that this could just be fixed by a simple line saying the expression of your beliefs about the nature of sex and sexuality is not harassment. And we can continue on with this legislation doing what it should do, which is stopping women from being harassed.
Yeah, so again, just needs a little tweak. And let's hope that common sense and a fear of a loss of government by the sitting state government will cause them to tweak this. Any other issues that you've identified in this proposed bill?
Yeah, along with the harassment thing, organisations are being given a positive duty to prevent harassment and prevent discrimination in the workplace. Again, that's an excellent thing. You as the employer, it's your job to do as much as you can to stop harassment. But again, when we start thinking about if harassment could include teaching what you believe about gender and sexuality, then a positive requirement to get rid of that form of harassment would actually mean faith organisations are legally prevented from saying or teaching what they believe. So again, we just want to be able to clearly state that teaching what you believe, living in accordance to what you believe, is not harassment and therefore doesn't fall under this positive duty. Otherwise, the Commission could be, and the Commission's been given ability and rights to investigate themselves. They could be investigating to say, oh, what have you been doing to stop harassment against people of same-sex attraction? And we're thinking, well, what are you expecting a conservative Bible-believing church to do to stop that harassment? No one should be bullied, but we can't stop saying what we believe and teaching what we believe.
Well, we're not supposed to stop, are we? We're supposed to have freedom of speech. So, Mike, I'm so happy that Freedom for Faith and other organisations like yours are highlighting these issues to people, because the average person probably wouldn't even have noticed this or picked up on it. So well done for doing this. Well done for the amazing work you do. If you've just joined us, Mike Southon is the Executive Director for Freedom for Faith, and they've identified some potential minefields in some Queensland government legislation. And Mike, if people want to know more about this, especially people in Queensland, and they want to contact their state MP and find out from Freedom for Faith how to do that, what's the best website for them to contact you via?
The best thing to find out more about this is contactyourmp.org.au. That is going to have all the information. Once we've finalised our analysis, Monday morning we'll have all the information about this legislation. Contactyourmp.org.au. But also, if you want to be kept up to date in general, find us at freedomforfaith.org.au.
Excellent. Well, Mike Southon from Freedom for Faith, just read out that website one more time for people to contact their MP. Contactyourmp.org.au. Mike Southon, I want to thank you so much for the work you're doing and also for joining us today on 2020.
Thank you. It's been great.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.